Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And once again, we on this side of the Atlantic find ourselves staring across the ocean at our friends and allies on the other side and wondering whether we actually belong to the same species. The right to bear arms, the gun lobby, the National Rifle Association already going into overdrive, attempting to somehow justify the laws that they have that, once again, have allowed an apparently disturbed young man to kill 9 class mates at a school in America. I say classmates, it hasn't been conclusively established yet whether he actually attended the college, but you take my point. Will we ever be able to understand this? Can you begin to make sense of it? And let's begin in Oregon, where the latest gun massacre has occurred. Do you ever read stories several times thinking that you've missed something or that you've misunderstood something? You can't really do it on the radio, can you? I know some radios have a rewind function, but if you've heard me say something and you've gone, what? You can't double check. It's probably a good job I repeat myself so much. A 26-year-old man has killed at least 9 people before being fatally shot himself. It's another school massacre. On this occasion, an adult college, actually, a college that taught grown-ups, a community college in Roseburg, Oregon. Social media profiles that have been tracked back to Chris Harper Mercer contain a predictable mixture of strangeness and strong opinion. He apparently featured some films expressing support for the IRA. He apparently, according to one report, had been buying Nazi memorabilia online, and he also apparently described himself on a dating website as a conservative Republican. Just be sure of one thing: any people loyal to any of those groups will be absolutely convinced already that it has nothing to do with them, and they're probably right. Dad had an English accent. I don't know if you picked up on that during some of the reports you've heard already today. He's been named, the father, as Ian Mercer, described himself as just as shocked as everybody at his son's actions. So he would appear to be British-born, or at least possessed of one English parent, and those are the facts. The rest of the story is no different from 100 others. The rest of the story is about a disturbed young person finding it so easy to get hold of a gun, marching into a school and opening fire on people, defenceless, unarmed people. I am not joking when I tell you that already some people, including a pastor, i.e. someone who is supposed to be doing God's work, already a pastor has come forward to suggest that if all the people in the classroom had had guns, this couldn't have happened. That even happened during the cinema shootings. Do you remember the cinema massacre? You had people coming forward to say, well, if everyone in the cinema had had a gun, then there wouldn't be so many dead. Which is about as close to insane as I've ever heard an apparently sane person get. Yeah, because if 400 people in a cinema all stood up and started shooting guns, everybody in there would be a hell of a lot safer. That's the second stupidest thing I've heard today. The stupidest was the suggestion earlier on this radio station that freedom of movement had somehow caused modern slavery. A quite brilliant observation, that, because, of course, the one thing all slaves have is freedom of movement. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. Can you explain it to a... What's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to cheapen the story in any way or trivialise it because, well, I just don't want to for obvious reasons. So I don't want to say an alien has just arrived from outer space and you're going to explain to them why this happens. So the question I'm going to phrase, or rather I'm going to phrase my question to you thus. Is the American psyche, the pro-gun psyche — I appreciate huge swathes of the nation are as disgusted by what's going on as we are, including the president, actually. I've never seen Barack Obama appear more sincere or more human than when he talks about this. Today, he says, once again, I find myself on this podium again. And he said the most frustrating legacy of his time in power has been his abject failure to do anything at all to limit gun control, or rather to increase gun control. If you follow me on Twitter, 0345 6060973 is the number you need to call me. But if you follow me on Twitter, at Mr. James OB, you can see on, I think, one of the last 3 tweets I've sent out, a letter written to Joe Biden, the Vice President of America, by the sheriff in Oregon who is now in charge of this case. The sheriff in Oregon, who is now in charge of this case, wrote to the Vice President urging him, exhorting him, encouraging him never, ever to adopt new gun laws. That in the aftermath of the last massive massacre at a school called Sandy Hook. You'll remember that. It was written by Dan Hodges in the Daily Telegraph after that massacre that the gun control debate was now over. America has effectively accepted that children dying is bearable. Children dying is preferable to gun control. And that is where my question comes from today. Explain it to me. I'm a Brit. I've visited America as a tourist. I've done a little bit of work there, but goodness me, talking about Los Angeles and New York and Washington, D.C., you don't really find yourself coming up against gun-toting rednecks in those locales. Some of the Republican politicians sort of keep guns almost on public display, but generally speaking, you're mixing with a sort of educated metropolitan population, and the idea that you need a gun in your boot of your car in case the government come knocking is palpably absurd. So explain to someone listening to this, whether or not America effectively looks at stories like this and says, yeah, that's a real shame, but it's more important that we can buy guns easily than it is to try to prevent massacres like this from happening again. I don't know what your perspective on this is, and I don't really mind any angle at all. It seems to me impossible to escape that conclusion. You look at a massacre like this, 9 people dead. You look at Sandy Hook, children killed on a grand scale. You look at 294 mass shootings. That's defined as an event in which 4 or more people were shot, not necessarily fatally. Just under 300 in the last year alone. But it's the school massacres, I think, that focus the mind of those of us on this side of the Atlantic. They're the things that we just can't see anybody ever saying, that's a price worth paying. Am I misrepresenting the American position? A gun crime occurs, a massacre unfolds in a school, and huge swathes of the nation look at that massacre and say, it's a terrible shame, it's an awful tragedy, but it's nothing to do with gun laws, and it's a price worth paying for the freedom to bear arms. That, to me, is what this story looks like. And that, to me, well, that's despicable and disgusting and deeply, deeply disturbing. You look at a massacre in a school, and you look at your country and you say the massacre is the price worth paying for my personal freedom to bear arms. I'm speaking to you from London in the United Kingdom. We're not in America. We don't have thousands and thousands of handgun-toting, pickup truck-driving rednecks listening to the programme, but we have a hell of a lot of Americans listening to the programme. We have a hell of a lot of informed, well-travelled metropolitan people listening to the programme. We have a hell of a lot of observers of human life and current affairs listening to the programme. And year in, year out, we find ourselves sitting here, looking at our friends and allies across the pond and wondering what planet they're on, what planet they could possibly inhabit if they look at a gun crime, a school massacre, and find themselves reaching immediately for defences of gun law rather than questions about whether possibly it doesn't go far enough. Phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Just answer me that. Is it unfair to suggest that America looks at school massacre and says, yep, I can live with that. The school massacre is unfortunate, but it's not as bad as gun laws. I would rather live in a country where schools get shot up on a regular basis than where it is more difficult to buy a gun. I've got no other way of unravelling this story. That seems to me to be what this nation says every time this sort of thing happens. I'd rather live in a country where schools get shot up on a regular basis than in a country where it was harder to get hold of a gun. You can agree with me, you can disagree with me, you can explain to me the point that I'm missing. But that's where we're starting. It seems, America says, would rather live in a country where schools get shot up on a regular basis, where children, on this occasion adults, pupils in schools get killed on a regular basis. I'd rather live there than in a country where it's harder for me to get hold of a gun. And if that is an accurate depiction of the American psyche, then we need to actually spend a little bit of time trying to unravel it, trying to understand it. And it's not the first time we've asked a variation on this question, but it's the first time I think the starkness of it has been quite so clear. Does America look at tragedies like the one that unfolded yesterday, the latest school massacre, and say, yep, okay, it's very sad, but that is a price worth paying for the freedom to bear arms? And if that is the case, can you make sense of it for someone who finds it absolutely staggeringly stupid? Adrian's in Reading. Adrian, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Okay, you have to understand the fact that America has a different outlook, has a different culture in the fact that they see, freedom as being their prime objective of their constitution, who they are, what they are. So if you imagine, if you're an American, you'll be thinking, I have freedom to do anything I like in my country, include have a firearm. And bear arms, obviously, is a phrase commonly used in the States. But you see, the Americans see firearms in a different way than perhaps we would. Okay, I belong to the National Rifle Association of the UK, which is a completely different outfit to America. And the way that we see guns in the UK, who are in the shooting community, is for purely target shooting and for improving accuracy and precision. But in America, they have magazines in the shelves in Walmart, for example, because I've been there, where they talk about home defense. What's better, an AR-15 for home defense versus a .45 pistol? So the way they see it is freedom to protect and defend your homestead, and what type of gun would be best suited for that task, what type of ammunition would be best suited for that task. And that's what you're dealing with.
And that is, in their minds, school massacres are a price worth paying for that, quote, protection, end quote.
For freedom, yes. They see...
Freedom not to go to school secure in the knowledge that you won't get shot today is a price worth paying for freedom to shoot someone who walks into your house.
Frankly, I don't think they think that way.
Now, how do they think? This is what I want to try and unravel this hour. How do you think they think?
I think they see it as their right and their laws, because...
That's not thinking, is it? That's just. I mean, laws are laws. I want to try. I know it's a big ask, mate, and I'm not going to punish you if you can't provide me with what I'm looking for. But in terms of their thinking, we look at it, and what you've just described it, I think fairly and accurately, and it sounds like having massacres in schools is a price worth paying for having a really cool gun in my bedside table.
It's not about having the cool gun.
Well, those magazines are trying to make guns sound cool, aren't they? They're saying this one will rip apart a person from 20 yards, and this one will do this and this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have magazines. They sell them by exciting people. So cool or sexy or whatever you want to call it seems fair to me. I
think tactical sort of concepts are obviously the manufacturers are trying to make their guns look good as well, for sure. But I think this boils down to the freedom. They're very patriotic. You see American Stars and Stripes everywhere. They're very. But
there's plenty of patriotic people who don't want to keep an Uzi in their bedroom cupboard.
Yeah, but they don't see it that way.
So what's the difference? If we were trying to really identify the difference, I think that the history, the freedoms, all of this makes sense. But I value history. I value freedom. I freedom of speech more than freedom to bear a gun.
Hang on a sec. But once you've been around firearms a lot, they don't scare you, and you just see them as part of, like, for example, your mobile phone. It's just a matter of it's another thing.
And if 30 kids got killed by someone wielding a mobile phone in a school tomorrow, I would look very differently at my mobile phone, wouldn't you?
Mobile phone. I know you would. But this is the point. Because their culture is different, they're so used to guns around them.
Yeah.
And they're free to have these things, and they don't want that necessarily eroded. There are obviously political strengths in America that are changing certain states. For example, I don't know whether you know, but in Boston, the state of, around Boston, you can't have magazines greater than 10 rounds. Okay, you're restricted to that. In California,
still a lot of gun crime.
I know, but it's still a big restriction, believe it or not. For example, in California, you can't have semi-automatic weapons anymore.
In a sentence, someone listening to this, listening to you, and finding you persuasive, intelligent, and informed, but in a sentence or two, what do they want it for? So these big, heady notions of freedom and protection, I understand, but they're not nitty-gritty, are they? These aren't people who spend a lot of time worrying about philosophy or reading Thomas Paine. What does that man there who reads about this school massacre, he's got it on the telly in the background now, he's having his waffles for breakfast, and he thinks to himself, well, that's a terrible shame, but my God, if they come after my gun, there'll be trouble.
Yeah, it's fear. If you think about where America came from, the Wild West.
That.
Yeah, fear of protecting your homestead, protecting your property, protecting your rights, protecting your freedom. It stems from fear of an apocalyptic situation, which is why they have all these zombie apocalyptic things. And
No, stop it. You're doing really well. Don't try and tie it into zombie films.
But it's true.
It can't be true. Really?
Well. I think some people do, yeah.
I'd like to see how you get on against them zombies if you don't have a gun, boy. That sort of thing. Okay, fair enough.
Sort of, it's fear of protecting their family, making sure that they...
Right, that's great, mate. You're a star. I'm really grateful to you. We'll start that off then. That's the first hook.
And we don't have that in the
fear.
UK.
Well, we do have fear. I mean, we have fear of various things being sort of stoked up by various people at the moment. Fear of foreigners, fear of this, fear of that. But whether or not that prompts anybody to want to reach for a gun, you'd have to hope would be profoundly un-British. Adrian, thank you. A lot longer with Adrian than I expected to, because I thought he was so good. I'll be talking to Mike in High Wycombe in just a moment, and we've even got a Cheech on the line, who I'm going to cautiously suggest might even be American. But of course, you are more than welcome. In fact, I insist that you get involved as well. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. Is it just fear? So I say to you, America, you're just scared. You're just scaredy cats. That's why you've got such a weird relationship with guns. You're scared. You're still living in the 18th century. Is that fair? I don't know. Do they look at the school massacre and say, that's all very sad, but not enough to make me contemplate toughening up gun laws? And if they do, make sense of that. Is there any more than fear to it? Mike's in High Wycombe. Mike, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. I think the enormity of the problem is the fact that there's a gun for every man, woman and child in America.
Yes.
So it's a colossal problem. And I think the fear is that they work on the theory of the only way to stop a guy with a gun is to have your own gun. So there lies the problem. It's the way they look at stuff. But I grew up in a farming environment where guns were commonplace, where it was quite normal to have guns in a truck or guns in a van, and people went out shooting. And I can remember as a teenager the police coming to take my grandfather's old .22 rifles that were left over from the war. Now that's in my lifetime.
Yes.
So 30 years after the war, there were still weapons kicking about from the war, and we used to play with ammunition in his shed. And,
so it's just there's too much. There's too much, and it's too late, is what you're saying.
I think so, but the point is now, I still know lots of people with guns, but they have a gun for rough shooting, for clay pigeon shooting, for gamekeeping, all those reasons. Americans have a gun to kill people.
Yeah, the thing is, I think you're right, Mike. I think you're right, but I think you're barking up the wrong tree this morning, because the question isn't really about the proliferation of guns in America. It's about the people who come forward on a morning like this one shouting already against any suggestion that they make it harder to own a gun. So, yes, you're right. If you wanted to actually really meaningfully reduce the amount of weapons in America, you'd have a whole different task ahead of you. But I'm trying to get inside the psyche of the people who today say, yeah, there's been a school massacre, but don't you dare suggest that I'm not allowed to buy a new gun tomorrow. It's not about the ones already in cupboards and the ones already in houses. It's about the laws governing how easy it is to buy one or to own one. Change the law, and you could render... You could... No, because I changed the law. I could render 100 million people criminals immediately. If you don't bring your gun forward and hand it in, you're going to get arrested. There you go, problem over.
But how do they start to change the psyche? That's the point.
Well, that's why I'm asking you.
What's changing is the thinking. Well, that's the point here. The people I know that possess guns have them for sport.
Not because they're frightened.
Work, if they're gamekeepers, for example.
Yes, no, of course. I mean, my friends who have guns are shooters, wasn't shooters, like gangsters. No, they go shooting birds and pheasants and things like that. It's 10:30, and before you start attacking me for having friends who go shooting pheasants, I should tell you, especially those who've been rude about my relationship with animals, I should probably rephrase that, over the years, I pick up my new puppy tomorrow. And you are listening to LBC, somewhat sadly, and I say that with sincerity, I promise you, Stuart. Stuart sent me this on Twitter as he thinks evidence of me being wrong. It's a quote from someone I've never heard of, but that's because these aren't really circles that I move in. If you are for gun control, then you are not against guns, because the guns will be needed to disarm people. So it's not that you are anti-gun. You'll need the police's guns to take away other people's guns. So you're very pro-gun. You just believe that only the government, which is of course so reliable, honest, moral and virtuous, should be allowed to have guns. There is no such thing as gun control. There is only centralising gun ownership in the hands of a small political elite and their minions. That's a quote from someone called Stefan Molyneux, which Stuart has sent to me with the tagline, "Bit of truth." Fair play, mate. I mean, looking at the same world and seeing profoundly different things doesn't necessarily mean one of us is horribly, horribly wrong and the other one horribly, horribly right. But that does seem to be endorsing the notion that you look at a school massacre and you say to yourself, that's a real shame, but it's a price worth paying for me being able to have a gun at home. And that's an American mental condition. That's a psychological outlet. That's a psyche. Canada, Switzerland, there are lots of countries in the world where the number of guns per members of the population is really, really high. What is it about America? Why school massacres? Why America? And why such violent resistance of any suggestion that it should be harder to get hold of a gun tomorrow than it was when the man responsible for the latest school massacre got hold of his yesterday, or last week, or last month? It's 10:36. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 3 phone lines free into the building. Don't email me complaining that you can't get through. Employ judicious use of redial. Is it a strange American historical psychological cocktail that explains the frequency of these tragedies and indeed the resistance to any attempts to minimise them happening again in the future? 0345 6060 973. Rebecca's in Beaconsfield. Rebecca, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hello. I primarily agree with the first caller. I'm an American. I've lived in this country, though, for 8 years, and I'm married to a Brit, but I go back a lot, so I'm kind of, I feel both. I have dual citizenship. Anyway, my parents have guns, and they have had their whole entire lives. And when we go over there, my son, who's 12, is quite fascinated with them. We go out, and my father's all about safety. We target shoot, that sort of thing. The thing is, it's never going to change. It is, again, an
well, they said that about slavery.
Okay, well, yeah, good point. But I'm just saying from an American perspective.
That was an American perspective.
The fundamental right to bear arms, it goes back to the Wild West days of, defending your home against intruders, that sort of thing. My parents have a business, and they deal with a lot of cash, so they bring home a lot of cash at night. My father has guns secured all over the house in case someone, because people would know. And
this is the most normal thing in the world that you're describing, isn't it?
It is to my family.
I know. I'm just making that point because a lot of people listening, their jaws will already be dragging along the floor. They've got guns all over the house. What, even in the bathroom?
Well, no, they're all locked away. So then when the children come, but they have them hidden in certain places, and they have.
So rather than lose a bit of money, he'd shoot someone, your dad?
Yes, because again, and he's 70 years old. He's the nicest man on earth.
I don't doubt that for a minute.
Right to defend himself.
I think he'd be a bit nicer if he didn't love guns so much, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but again, and what Brits don't understand about Americans is that culturally we have so much spirit and love for guns. The flag, for America, for the right to bear arms, the right to defend ourselves. It's also,
so you must hate living here. You must feel really unsafe.
No, I love living here.
Hang on. Oh, have you got guns all over your house?
I don't. I don't.
Well, your dad must be terrified for your safety.
Well, my dad was... No, he had daddies.
I'm getting confused now, Rebecca.
He's just a normal, chilled guy. No,
Have you told him that we don't have any Red Indians running rampage here, and therefore you don't need to go back to the Wild West in order to justify the use of guns? We're okay.
If someone came...
Native Americans.
I wish I'd have a gun. If someone came after my children, and there was a choice between a baseball bat and a gun, if I had a gun, I would use it.
Well, that's true of everybody. But then you see the massacres at Sandy Hook and the one in Oregon yesterday, and you say to yourself, well, obviously, yeah, I mean, in a really, really theoretical, exaggerated, extreme scenario, I can imagine wanting to shoot someone. But hey, look what the ease of access to guns does to our country on an almost daily basis. Just under 300 mass shootings in America in the last year. So is it fair to say that people like your dad, and you actually, your dad's not here to defend himself, you are. You look at the massacres and you say, yep, that is a price. I mean, reluctantly, I don't want to suggest that you're being glib or insensitive, but that is the price worth paying for the right to bear arms. Dead children on an almost weekly basis.
Well, what my response to that would be, if you pass harsher gun laws, or if you ban...
Your response to that has to be yes or no.
the only thing that's going to change.
It's not a yes or a no.
I'm not going to give you a yes or no. Let me just.
Well, by not answering, you are.
Well,
That's a price worth paying. If I had to arrange a hierarchy of concern, I'd be more concerned about my dad not being able to have a gun in his house than I am about the fact that there'll be another school massacre next week or next month. As sure as eggs is eggs.
Me personally, no. But as American, let me tell you what Americans would say. American gun owners would say, and this would be my father. He would say that if you pass tougher laws, that the only thing it's going to do is make it difficult for responsible gun owners to get guns.
Oh, I can live with that.
They're not going to take the guns out of the bad people in the criminals' hands. They're not going to go.
I'm not talking about bad people and criminals. We're talking about previously law-abiding people, often children, who end up killing others. In fact, let's leave them out of it. Do you know how many kids kill themselves with family-owned guns every year in the States?
And that's horrible. Yes, But
that again, that's by accident. That's a price worth paying for your dad having a gun in his cabinet.
Culturally, that's what they would think.
Culturally, that's what they would think. I think you're right. And I don't quite... I mean, so what would you think? If I could wave a magic wand and reduce the amount of guns in America immensely and make it much harder for anybody to get hold of them, and I could just, in a theoretical universe, if I could do that, would you vote for me?
Yes.
No.
Yes, I would like to see guns reduced.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I don't have my gun. My father gave me a gun when I moved into my first apartment, and I kept it in my bedside table.
How sweet!
But I know, because he loved me, and he.
My mum gave me a Teasmade.
A toaster. It was a gun.
Well, I suppose horses for courses. Rebecca, thank you so much for your call, and for indulging my slightly disrespectful tone, perhaps. But I don't feel much respect for the opinions you describe. I do, however, have to recognise the reality of them. Christian is in Blackheath. Christian, what would you like to say?
As this program progresses, there's so many more points to bring up.
Of course.
It's ridiculous. But let me preface this by saying that I have a military background, and by no stretch are my opinions representative of the whole of America. So,
no.
Just to make that clear. Going back to your first caller who referenced home invasions, and it's a scare tactic in terms of how guns are being marketed and whatnot. The FBI says there are over 6,600 home invasions per day. So I think from that perspective alone, the American mentality is such that, you know what, I have the right to protect my own life. My
yeah, but you know what I'm going to do now, don't you?
Yeah, I know.
Well, there's 6,600 home invasions a day. That gun thing isn't working out so well, is it?
No. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. But the problem.
Do you know what? Actually, I can't say that because I did get burgled a few years ago. Let's pretend that. Jones, have you ever been burgled? Jones the engineer's never had his home invaded, and he doesn't own a gun. There you go. That is proof that if you don't own a gun, your home doesn't get invaded.
Oh, I agree. Like I said, my thoughts are in no way representative of the rest of that. So, but I think that's kind of a general mentality of, the number is high enough that, maybe, I have some right to protect my own family, my own life, my own house, my own possessions, and so on and so forth. Second to that, I think he also referenced slight variations in terms of state to state, and that's one of the problems that exists now, is that each state has slight variations on their own gun laws. I'm from Chicago.
Well, they've toughened things up, haven't they, in the recent years?
Well, yes and no. It's interesting because for the longest time, the city limits of Chicago proper had a flat-out gun ban. And, there's, false borders, right? It's not a physical border, so does it really matter? No, of course not. It didn't do anything. That ban was lifted until, I think it was a couple of years ago, Illinois had approved a conceal carry law. So now most states in the U.S., if not all states in the U.S., have slightly variations of the law, but you can conceal carry if you meet certain requirements. And what those requirements are,
So I need to hurry you a little because of time, Christian. So you describe what I think we'd call a mishmash of legislation.
That's exactly what I said. Yeah. So the easiest thing to do is consolidate the laws across the U.S. There's no reason why it has to be state to state. But you've got Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other side, and we kind of know where they stand. Certain laws have tried to get passed through legislation and just completely failed because The Republicans say no.
But no, you're not. Well, I'm going to have to push you towards this question, which is people waking up this morning seeing the massacre. Are they, whether they realise it or not, effectively saying that's a price worth paying for the status quo, regardless of how confused it may be and how much legislation may contradict according to city limits? They look at a school massacre, and I'm going to say yet another school massacre, and they somewhere inside compute that as the price they pay for the status quo.
The people would say no, the politicians would say yes. And that's just the way it is.
And the people would be wrong.
Well, the people would be... No, all I'm saying is the people would say this is unacceptable. This is not the price we should be paying for this type of...
But they can't unravel that. If it's really easy to get hold of guns, there'll be massacres.
I absolutely agree. And going back to your previous caller, she had basically mentioned gun ownership is so ingrained. It goes way back, before the Wild West. We're talking about, this is Revolutionary War. It's our Second Amendment, right?
Yeah.
It's so ingrained, and maybe it's been misinterpreted over the years in terms of what that amendment actually means, and that's been argued from time to time. But I don't think from a whole. The mentality of the U.S. is that, no, it's our Second Amendment. We have a right to bear arms. Now, how you get that arm or how you get that weapon, yes, I think that should be much more aggressive than what it is now. There's no reason why... Because
then at least if more children die tomorrow, then the politicians and their citizens could say, well, we are doing our best to minimise events like this. And yet they don't seem to be... There doesn't seem to be any appetite to do that. Christian, thank you. I'm cracking on because I'm already 2.5 minutes late for this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:51. Thank you for the call so far. You've got my little grey cells whirring away at a right rate of knots. And here's what I'm thinking now with regard to the latest school massacre in America, on this occasion in Oregon. We'll find out more about the shooter, who's been named as Chris Harper Mercer and was possibly British or British born. We'll find out more about him in the course of the day. But as you canvass opinion, and I told you there'd be plenty of American people listening as well, even though we're based in Britain. What I can't pin down, and maybe you could help me, is... What is it in America that is more frightening or more threatening or more insecure than life here? So the lovely American lady whose dad bought her a gun when she moved into her first apartment loves living here, doesn't feel unsafe here and doesn't feel insecure here. Why not? We've got criminals. Some of them have guns. We've got people who wish us ill. We've got enemies. So what is it that's not here? That is there. That I think is why I used the phrase right at the top of the hour about Oscar Wilde's description of us being two countries divided by a common language. It's a beautiful phrase, that, because it's almost as if you employ the same vocabularies and yet you mean very different things. So what is the subtle difference here between Britain and America? Why would an American feel safe in Britain but not feel safe in Oregon? To a degree that they have to go out and get a gun, which is really easy to do. That's the question, isn't it? If I moved to America, would I run the risk of feeling more gun-friendly? Well, do you know what? I'm going to have to get a gun. What's the switch that must flick as you cross that pond? David's in Elm Park. David, what can you tell us?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello, David.
Yeah, I think you've got it spot on with all you're saying. I mean, I used to live in America and work. I had a green card about 25 years ago. I gave it up, not because of guns, but that was one thing that I never sort of could fathom. How people over there will look at programs like American Guns and think the way we would look at the Antiques Roadshow. It's entirely normalised. A lot of Americans, the ones I knew, they would look on banning guns as like banning cars. As cars kill people, it's all the one thing. Why is it like that? It has evolved from the early American days where there was reason for those laws that people could go out, defend themselves against wild animals, or whoever happened to...
But I mean, you can say that about spurs.
Very different.
You needed spurs then because you spent so much of your day on a horse. You just that society doesn't exist anymore, which is why most people don't walk around with spurs hanging off the back of cowboy boots. So why guns? Why have guns persisted and other things haven't? What other accoutrements of the Wild West can we think of that are no longer with us? Those swinging doors on saloons, they're not with us anymore. People don't walk around in 10-gallon hats on anything like the scale they walk around with guns. So why is that sustained?
Precisely. It has become what it is now, and this is what's sadly the way it is it's so ingrained over in America that this is what you're going to get again and again and again. You're going to get these massacres. There'll be worse ones, there'll be smaller ones.
And do they look at it, do you think? Because this is an uncharitable analysis, but no one's really disputed it yet. They look at the massacres in the schools, they look at, on this case, dead adults, but usually dead children, and they say, terrible shame, but not as bad as us being told to give up our guns.
They don't quite look on it as cold as that. They won't say, nobody in the right...
They don't admit it as cold as that, but that's what's going on in their heads.
It is, but they blame the people, and they also, when they saw that massacre in Paris, a lot of Americans in the gun lobby were saying that the authorities were to blame for not arming the school staff, because then they would have been able to defend themselves. It really is madness. I used to shake my head. The people used to show me their guns and everything, so... I think the only answer, if you want to look for an answer to this, the problem is right now in America, you've got people own guns like we own cars almost.
Yes.
So
it's
going to take, it's going to be impossible to get the better of them and introduce legislation overnight.
No one's saying overnight, but Barack Obama's a pretty bright guy. He's had some pretty good ideas in other areas he's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I'd like to see him have a fair crack of the whip. Fair crack of the whip, actually. There you go. People don't carry whips around anymore. He needed them in the Wild West. And David, thank you. Lucia is in Ramsgate. Lucia, what would you like to say? What's the difference between us and them on this one?
It's Lucia.
Lucia, I apologise.
That's right, Lucia. Do you know, the main difference is fear. Americans...
But it's the land of the brave, the land of the free, not the land of the fearful, the land of the scared.
You see, yeah, they're afraid. They fear government. They fear invasion from within and from without.
Sound like
They're
UKIP.
Constantly vigil against either home invasion or somebody trying
country
to take
invasion.
away their rights as Americans. And it all comes down to the fact how America was actually founded. America is a country that was stolen, right?
Every country was stolen from someone at some point in history.
No, but we know we had an empire. Britain had an empire. It's called an empire. Nobody decides to join in an empire, right? But you don't... If you get it into your head that somehow you liberated a country, when in fact, deep down inside, you knew you stole it, you're going to be in constant fear of somebody doing the same thing to you. And that's what's happened. America is a country that was built as a part of an empire and then goes to break away, and they have this obsession with the idea of being in a revolution, but they've never gotten over the revolution. So the revolution happened and they got their...
So everything is temporary. The mindset is that this could be a temporary nation, and if we don't have guns, it could be taken away from us by, and then fill in the gap according to your own paranoid prejudice.
Yeah,
again...
American, and they're all paranoid about the idea of it being taken away from them, and because they don't trust their government either, right? I mean, people might say here, we don't trust the government, but we do really. We trust that if something
we don't think they're actively working against our... Well, again, we've got UKIP echoes going on here, but most normal people don't think that the government actively and deliberately works against our interests and in service to some secret organisation. They might be rubbish and a bit incompetent and a bit dishonest sometimes, but they're not actually our enemies.
Yeah, exactly. And when you come from a whole, it's a very strange country. It seems to have this kind of split personality between being founded by right-wing Christianity, which is what the Puritans were. They go over there. And
then, of course, subsequently extolling the virtues of essentially liberal values. Yes, it's a very good point, that, and the phrase split personality seems to fit. There's a conflict at the heart of America's relationship with guns, and if you want to see it writ large, if you want to see it absolutely laid out in the starkest of terms, have a look at the letter I tweeted before my show this morning from the @Mr. James O'Bee account, written by the sheriff in Oregon, who is now investigating this massacre after the Sandy Hook massacre, when children, of course, rather than adults, were murdered. And he wrote to the Vice President, urging him not to even contemplate the vaguest changes to gun laws. And it is the attitude of men like that that caused that man to have to walk through these blood-splattered classrooms today. And yet, I'm fairly confident he'll still subscribe to that school of thought. Absolutely remarkable.
I've been getting away with it all my